Welcome to Inception 101. We are so excited to have you here with us today. This is our last session for our 101 series, and it's been really great to do a high-level overview of the new version of the platform. So for those of you who have been with us for all 4 sessions, we really appreciate you being here, and we're really excited about today's session. Today we'll be talking about optimization on the new version of the platform. So I'm excited to dive in. A quick introduction. If you're new here, my name is Jenny Hearn. I'm part of our marketing team at Ascend. And with me today, I have Tessa Blankenship, one of our solution architects. Tessa, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Really excited to go through this content too. I think it's going
Yeah,
to clean up everything throughout this entire webinar. So really excited.
yeah, I think it does bring it together really nicely. And you kicked this series off on building. So I think it's nice symmetry that you're closing us out on optimizing as well. So you'll be back in just a minute. I'll bring you up, but I do want to give a quick overview of our agenda and where we're heading today. We're going to do a recap of our 101 series so far, bring all of those concepts together and talk about optimization and specifically optimization strategies within Inception. And then Tessa will also cover some benchmarking results and demo some of that optimization within the platform itself. We will have time for Q&A at the end of this session as well, so feel free to throw questions in that Q&A tab throughout the session, and we'll be able to answer those at the end. So going through a recap of Inception 101 so far, we've been here for the past 3 weeks. This is our 4th week covering the basic concepts and experience of the latest and greatest version of the platform. Building. So again, Tessa kicked us off with that session on building in the platform, where she built an end-to-end pipeline with the help of an AI assistant that we're calling Otto. And then we had Nandan talk about automation in the platform and how we have this metadata core that drives all of the automation, both native and custom extensible automation that you can plug into that automation engine to drive whatever automation you're hoping to achieve based on that metadata. And then last week, Ayush covered observability on the platform and how all of that metadata gets exposed to you as a user so that you can drive optimization yourself or control things when there's errors. You can go and look at logs and traces. And today we're covering optimization. And really, over the past 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks, we've been grounding in this architecture of the new platform. We've talked about these different roles that exist on data teams, big and small. You can wear multiple hats if you're on a smaller team, but in bigger teams, these are split into different roles. But what we're hoping to achieve with this new architecture is that we have a centralized data engineering platform where all of these different roles come together and can ingest, transform, deliver, orchestrate, and optimize all of their workloads. And then what's happening is that we're collecting metadata. The platform is collecting metadata on all of that activity that fuels automation and enhances the experience of that AI assistant Otto because it becomes context aware. But at the center of all of this is really that metadata core that is driving so much of the performance that we'll talk through today. And so we want to bring this all together. Over the past 4 weeks, we've talked about building, automation, observability, and optimization. But what's fueling all of that is the metadata at the core. So metadata in Ascend enables a really streamlined build experience, as we witnessed with Tessa a couple weeks ago, with that context-aware AI assistant Otto who understands your business, understands the workloads that you're working with, and can be really helpful in generating components and providing assistance to users as they build, because it has access to that metadata if you choose to expose it to Otto. But it also enables that seamless automation that Nandan talked about, where you have those native automations like orchestration that just work. But you can also use that metadata to drive custom automations and extensible automations based on your business needs. And then lastly, it drives unobstructed observability. So you have UI-based dashboards and logs and data plane access to all metadata generated by Ascend. And all of that together combines to create really massive efficiencies. And that's what brings us to our final session today, optimization. And so Tessa is going to really drive us through what are the optimization strategies? How is this all pulled together to really create the most efficient system that you can have? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and Tessa, I'll invite you to start sharing your slides and we will hand this off.
Yes. So optimization strategies. We're going to start off with ingestion. And I'm just going to go through the basic ingestion strategies that we currently have. Those are definitely available in Inception as well. Uh, Incremental. So we're providing two different modes, which is historical and latest. You can provide a unique key for the table, and we'll handle the logic to get you the latest value in the table, or create a history table with the change date automatically. Partitioned. So a lot of our users use the blob storage. So we are only processing the new or modified files here with partitions. And that's typically, you'll see a lot of that with the blob storage. One thing that we did add here is going to be for partition tables. We are doing batches for all the partitions into one job instead of one job per partition. That's going to make the processing much faster. That does apply to all of our partitioned components. So that could be even your downstream components. Full resync, that's where you're getting your data every single time that the component runs, and you're replacing the data that was already ingested. Snapshot, that is where you're going to run everything, get your new data every time the component runs, but you're actually going to create a new partition every time it runs. So you get a history of that data. And then change data capture, which is really based on the database enabled feature, where you're only processing change data. So that could be MySQL, SQL Server, that type of database that you can find that capability. And every time that it processes that new data, a new partition is created for that component. So those still exist. There is an article about when to use these, because it really is important to look at that and to figure out what you have as far as from your source system to make things a little more optimized. But we do have some really exciting things on ingestion for Inception, and that's going to be schema evolution. So schema evolution is going to be available on partitioned and incremental ingest components. And there is going to be 4 different options. It's actually available now. There are 4 different options. Ignore, fail, append new columns, and sync all columns. So this functionality removes that requirement for you to re-ingest all of your data when a schema change is made. That is amazing. That's going to go across all your different ingestion methods and make your life a lot easier. No more reprocessing that data. You'll be able to select whether you just want to have the null values across the previously ingested data and have all your new data with the new columns. So that's something super exciting. Of course, you can ignore schema changes and not fill the component, which is pretty awesome as well, if you don't want to add that column downstream. And then you have the option to fill. If you really do want to know when that column gets added, then you'll get alerted. So that's something that's new and I'm really excited about. Another thing that we have on ingestion that's new is the external table support for Snowflake. Those of you that are Snowflake users, Snowflake offers the ability for you to connect your blob storage directly to Snowflake staging. And then Ascend gives you the ability to create an external table from that stage and process the new files when the flow runs. So running the transformations directly on that external table in Snowflake. And Ascend is also going to extract all of the partitioning on the external table so that you don't lose any of that powerful functionality that partitioned ingestion and the Ascend metadata to manage it has. And it's going to prevent that data reprocessing, because we'll be able to extract those partitions. Then in downstream components, we're talking about generic tasks, transformations, anything after the ingestion process. We do have a lot of options there. Sometimes your data isn't structured the way that allows you to take advantage of Ascend's metadata, and our streamlined repartitioning is actually one of those things that you can do to create that structure that's going to best suit your use case. So you can use repartitioning in your transforms to take care of that, and to set it up in a way that's going to process most efficiently for you. We also have partition filtering. So partition filtering is something that is pretty advanced. You're going to be able to use a where statement in the configuration that is going to track and filter out any data or partitions that you're not looking to process. So that really gives you more control over what you're processing and when you're processing it. We also have the incremental transform, which I think a lot of you are going to be excited about. It allows you to easily implement a merge statement without you actually having to write it. So you're going to be able to tell us, hey, I want historical data, or I want the latest values. This is my unique key, or this combination of keys, or my composite key. And then we're just going to handle it from there. So we will create the table. We will handle the merge statement. We will get you what you need with that incremental transform. View materialization, that is actually something new as well. We allow you and enable you to create manager views in Ascend now. So you'll be able to use them as inputs for your downstream transformations, manage that code, no more writing views in some other warehouse and then having to manually go and update it whenever you make changes. So it also is going to allow you to optimize your flow with a little more granularity, because you're going to be able to think about what interim queries really just should be views and not materialized tables. And then my favorite, the generic tasks. So we did talk about this in the build webinar, so everybody should know that I'm excited about this. You can create and manage stored procedures here. You can trigger third-party processes, run multiple SQL statements. You can run Python scripts. Really, when it comes to working with data, there are times where you just need the ability to run a script, and that is the most optimized approach that you have. So you can do that with Ascend, and you can do that with our generic tasks. So looking at some more optimization, we're going to go into some detail on the Ascend Planner side and then the optimizer strategies there. This might look really familiar. Nandan went through these in a webinar a while back. I think it's definitely worth revisiting, as it does highlight how Ascend can optimize your pipelines. And choosing a strategy makes a difference. So when you look at the values on the left, you can see that the view and the incremental transforms outperform the partition flows. And that's for a smaller data set. But then as the data size increases, then you can see an increase in the performance for the partitioned flows. So ideally, you would use a combination, right? You would use a combination depending on your sources, what's available. Do I need to repartition my data to make it run more effectively? And you would just take those different strategies across your flows and even in one particular flow and really focus on the performance without having any kind of limitation on how you implement it with Ascend. So we have also been working a little further on some improvements to increase this performance in all of these areas. And the preliminary results have shown that these new improvements that we've been working on, we're going to talk about in a second, have increased the performance for the partitioned incremental runs and actually show that they process 2 times faster with half the resources than the incremental loads and 92% faster than standard reprocessing, which is pretty amazing. It's spectacular. That brings me to the optimizations that we're now providing. You may remember some of these concepts from last week's webinar on observability, where I talked about how we use metadata to track when code or data changes using the data and the code fingerprints. That's something that we had in Gen 2, definitely have it in Gen 1 and in Gen 3 now. But in addition to these functionalities, we have added some metadata lineage fingerprints that takes the key aspects of the ingestion component that can have an effect on the actual data that it's ingesting. So instead of ingesting data based on a simple change to a component configuration that didn't have or wouldn't have any effect on the data that's already been processed, we're actually using this metadata lineage fingerprint to pick out those key aspects of a component that will have an effect on what was ingested so that you don't have to reprocess data that isn't going to be affected by your small change. So this also applies to transform code fingerprints. So if a change is made to the code that's not going to affect the output of the data, then the data will not be reprocessed. The metadata lineage fingerprint is also used for job deduplication and our schema evolution functionality. So when a change is made to the schema, the original metadata lineage fingerprint is kept and referenced to prevent any unneeded reprocessing. So you might have a schema that had changed, and you might have a new metadata lineage fingerprint based on that data change. But you have the previous one as well. So you don't have to reprocess the previously ingested partitions because you already know that the change was not material to the output. And I'm just going to show my screen real quickly just to identify what I'm talking about when I talk about how we process data and we know if something needs to be reprocessed. So looking here in Ascend, you can see that this flow has ran successfully. And within it, you'll see that there are 0 partitions that required computation out of 5 total. And then here I have 1 out of 1. Now, this component itself, if we look at it, it's just pulling in CSV files, which means that there's 5 CSV files. There wasn't a change from the previous run, so there wasn't a need to reprocess anything. When I look at this weather stations read connector, I can see that I'm hitting a Postgres database. I'm pulling in data from that table, and our default is going to be a full resync. So I did process 1 partition. And when you look downstream from that, you can see that the transformations actually show that they didn't process anything. So there wasn't a change in this data set, even though I did the full resync and I did pull in 1 partition. That data didn't change here. So there's no need to process anything after that point. That's the incredible optimization that we handle with our metadata. All right, so we also have something new called data profiles. So these are going to be used whenever you do need to use that repartitioning functionality in your transformations. If you have data that isn't partitioned, but partitioning is going to be more optimal to reprocessing all of the data every time. We use that in the downstream transform. The data profile is created for each partition and is stored. And then when the data is processed, the values are referenced. And only the new data in the upstream component will be processed with the new or updated partition being created in that transform. That keeps your flow running where you created partitions. We're only going to continue to process new or updated data. And then another new concept is going to be the semantic ID. So that is going to allow you to turn it on or off. And basically, whenever you're processing a flow, if there was already a recent update, like let's say that the last time it ran was 15 minutes ago and there really hasn't, there might be a new file, but it was pretty recent, it will actually stop the reprocessing of files so that if that update doesn't necessarily need to be ran, we're going to just skip it and not run it at all. So that's going to optimize as far as time, as far as processing. You can also set it up so that it will stop the reprocessing of files that may have changed, but they have the same name. Maybe you don't need to re-ingest old files that have been modified because you don't have really a use case for tracking those type of modifications. Or there's a system that just keeps making a small modification that you can't stop. So you may not want to actually be processing those files. So the semantic ID, turning that on and off is going to help you there. And then there's another feature that we're going to be adding where you will have the ability to set the max age value in future releases. So what that means is that when we had the concept of there was a recent update or not, if we've already ran our pipeline, maybe we don't need to run it again. This would actually allow you to set a max age value for that, meaning that if my whole flow just completed processing about 15 minutes ago and there's a new file. Maybe I don't need to process that yet. Maybe I'm going to just process that in 30 minutes. So that'd be really cool. All right, so that goes over a lot of our automated optimizations under our pipeline planner. And of course, we definitely showed you in the build webinar about Otto. I'm sure everybody has seen that demo where Otto is our best intern, definitely going to help us with faster development. He can handle creating components for us, create documentation about our flows. And then in addition to that, he can actually be helpful in onboarding new team members. You can ask Otto to build a new flow for you. You can work through each piece to add what you need. You can ask him to tell you the best approach. You can ask him all kinds of questions. Yeah, definitely ask Otto. So he's there to help you with faster development for sure. I know that as I've been building on Inception with our own pipelines, moving them over, it's been really exciting to work through adding new components with Otto, asking him to create summaries for me. So I know that you'll be excited with the faster development that he's going to provide you. Bolts and parameters, we definitely talked about this as well, but it is worth mentioning again, having the ability to bring your own bolt is going to alleviate duplicate efforts in managing your secrets. This doesn't just affect your team. A lot of teams, like depending on your organization, having that password management impacts other teams. So by being able to bring your own vault, your own secret manager, what that does, it's going to remove some of those choke points in that process that are blockers for development. It'll make that process a lot smoother. You'll be able to just hook up to that vault, ask that those credentials be added, and no need to duplicate the effort of putting it in Ascend anymore. And then parameters, that's going to definitely reduce your repetition in code. And it's going to remove the risk of missing a spot where maybe logic was changed. So you definitely want to be using parameters in your flows to help manage that. So if there's some kind of categorical information or maybe an area where you put that value across multiple transformations, even if you put it across multiple ingestion components, definitely put it in a parameter. Managing the parameters will also allow you to set up different criterias based on whether you're doing development or if it's a production flow run, which is helpful. Applications. So I know that we haven't talked about applications yet because this is fairly new and really exciting. So the addition of applications into Gen 3 is actually going to allow you to create templated flows that use parameters to define and produce multiple flows. So it's like a flow generator that you're going to be able to build. The use case here is very common across the data space. You have a common ETL or ELT pipeline that's nearly identical across your sources, and you just want to create and manage that flow in one place. So you can use applications to define the differences and deploy multiple applications and flows based on the input that you defined. So you can use a combination of macros. You'll have a powerful tool that's going to enable you to create and manage all of your common patterns across Ascend, which is really exciting. And then with applications, you can also create compound components, and those act as a point for multi-table ingestion from maybe one source. And then that can include like some templated transforms that live in a single collapsible group within that compound component. So these can be miniature little flows. You can use those, you'll use those in combinations with your application. You can deploy those across multiple flows, maybe that have different setup in the beginning. So like subflows. It's really exciting to see. Definitely something that I've come across a need for in data engineering is you don't want to write the same code over and over. You don't want to manage it everywhere. You want to be able to generate these flows based on a pattern and make it simple. That is going to make your development so much faster. And I think that pretty much covers all of that. If there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tessa. There is one question in the chat, but the question in the Q&A tab is if the code fingerprint of an incremental reconnector changes, will it overwrite all the existing partitions?
Oh, yeah, that is a really good question. If the data itself will be impacted by that code change, then yes, it will. So you could do something where if you're saying maybe a schema change, I think you'd be okay. Just depends on what you're looking to do with that. If it's a code change, then I can imagine that you would want that to reprocess if you have categorical changes in your data set.
So if a code changes, it will reprocess all the partitions that are affected by that code change. But if perhaps there's a partition that isn't impacted by that change in code, the data in that partition isn't impacted, it won't reprocess. That is what I understood. Is that
Correct.
correct, Tessa?
Yeah, and we do have some more granular control that we're working on as well for that to see maybe you want to just freeze it where as long as your incremental load doesn't include changing the merge statement to something that maybe didn't exist before. So I can see like a new column coming around. That might be a little bit of a problem, but we are looking at some more granular uh, processing capabilities there for sure.
Great. I know we are at time, but I know there are some other controls around like when partitions are processed. You talked about the semantic ID and things like that. So that granularity, it seems like that's something that'll be really exciting to work with in Gen 3, that you have really fine-grained control of what is processed and what isn't based on whatever your business needs are.
Yeah, we actually have a new feature that we're working on as well as far as partitions go. So you would have the ability to freeze partitions, delete partitions, reprocess partitions on your ingest component, which I think will be really useful, especially when it comes to when you're joined up with a blob storage that you don't manage, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your time over the past 4 weeks. Tessa, thank you for being here. We've really enjoyed having you all for Inception 101. And definitely keep an eye out. We'll be having deeper webinars that explore these concepts way more in depth. We know it was a really high level overview of all of these different optimization strategies. And I'm sure those each could go into way more depth and detail on how you actually implement those and when to choose which strategy. So we'll have more sessions in the future that break these concepts down further, and we can't wait to see you there. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks for being here.